The sun was just starting to shine over London on the big day. The city streets were already filling with people who wanted to see a coronation. Flags hung from buildings and flowers lined the roads. Everyone was waiting for the royal family to appear. In Kensington Palace, the royal children were already awake. Prince George, the oldest at 10 years old, stood by his window. He watched workers setting up barriers along the streets. George knew this day was very important. One day, he would be king too. He straightened his back and practiced his royal wave in the mirror. "George, are you ready?" His father, Prince William, called from the hallway. "Yes, father," George answered. He tugged at his special outfit one more time. It was blue with gold buttons, made just for today. In the room next door, Princess Charlotte was sitting very still while a helper fixed her hair. At 8 years old, Charlotte understood that today was special. She wore a white dress with a small tiara that sparkled when she moved. "Will there be many people watching us?" Charlotte asked Kate, who was checking her daughter's shoes. "Yes, my dear. Millions of people from all over the world," Kate said. She smiled at her daughter. "But you don't need to worry. Just remember what we practiced." Charlotte nodded. She had been practicing her curtsy for weeks. The youngest royal, 5-year-old Prince Louis, was not as calm as his brother and sister. He ran around his room, making his helpers laugh as they tried to catch him. "Louis, please stand still so we can put on your coat," Kate said, trying not to smile. Louis giggled but finally stood still long enough to get dressed. "Will I have to be quiet the whole time?" Louis asked, his face serious for a moment. "Yes, for as long as you can," William answered, coming into the room. "It's a very important day for the family." Louis nodded, but his eyes were full of mischief. William and Kate shared a worried look. Their youngest son was known for being playful at public events. Outside, the royal cars waited. They were black and shiny, with small flags on the front. Helpers rushed around, checking that everything was perfect. Inside the palace, the royal family gathered in the main hall. Other family members were already in their cars, heading to Westminster Abbey. "Now remember, children," William said, kneeling down to look them in the eyes. "Today is about showing respect. You must be on your best behavior." "Yes, father," the 3 children said together. Kate straightened George's collar one last time. She fixed a strand of Charlotte's hair and made sure Louis's shoes were tied tight. "You all look perfect," she said with pride in her voice. The family walked outside to their waiting car. Cameras flashed as they appeared. George waved exactly as he had practiced. Charlotte gave a perfect smile. Louis waved with both hands, nearly jumping with excitement. As they drove through London, crowds cheered and waved flags. The children looked out the windows with wide eyes. They had never seen so many people gathered in one place. "Look at all the people," Louis said, pressing his face against the window. "They're here to see the coronation," George explained to his little brother. "It's a very big deal." Charlotte sat up straight, trying to look like a proper princess. "The Queen told me I must wave like this," she said, showing her brothers a gentle side-to-side motion. The car moved slowly through the crowds. Police officers on horses rode alongside. The noise got louder as they got closer to Westminster Abbey. "We're almost there," William said. "Remember what we talked about?" The children nodded. They knew this was their first big test as royal children. Today, they would stand before the world. Today, they would show that they understood what it meant to be part of the royal family. The car turned the corner, and Westminster Abbey came into view. Its huge towers reached up to the sky. The moment they had prepared for was about to begin. The car stopped in front of Westminster Abbey. The huge old church stood tall and mighty against the blue sky. Bells rang loudly, telling everyone that the royal family had arrived. Outside, hundreds of people waited behind barriers. They all wanted to see the royal children. "Look at all the cameras," Charlotte whispered to George. She held her brother's hand tight. "It's okay," George said. Just smile and wave like we practiced." A man in a fancy uniform opened the car door. Prince William stepped out first. He turned and helped Kate, who looked beautiful in her light blue dress. Then, one by one, the children stepped out of the car. George went first, standing tall with his shoulders back. At 10 years old, he already knew how to act like a future king. He smiled and waved at the people who cheered his name. Charlotte came next, holding her mother's hand. She gave a perfect little curtsy that made the crowd cheer even louder. Her small tiara sparkled in the sunlight. Last came Louis, the youngest at 5 years old. His eyes grew wide at the noise and all the people. For a moment, he looked scared. But then he saw someone in the crowd holding a toy bear. Louis pointed and smiled. The crowd loved it. "This way, Your Royal Highnesses," said a man in a red coat. He would guide them through the day. The family walked up the steps of Westminster Abbey. The big wooden doors stood open. Inside, it was cool and dark compared to the bright sunshine outside. The children looked up at the high ceiling. It seemed to touch the sky. "Wow," Louis said, his voice echoing a little. Kate quickly put her finger to her lips to remind him to be quiet. Many important people were already inside. Kings and queens from other countries, famous singers and actors, politicians in their best clothes. They all turned to look as the royal children walked in. "Remember to bow when we pass the altar," William whispered to George and Louis. "And Charlotte, remember your curtsy." The children nodded. They had practiced these moves many times at home. They walked slowly down the long aisle. The floor was made of stone that had been there for hundreds of years. Many kings and queens had walked this same path. Now it was their turn. Music played from a large organ. The sound filled the whole church. Charlotte loved music and started to sway a little to the beat. Kate gently touched her shoulder to remind her to walk straight. Louis looked at everything with wide eyes. The colorful windows told stories with pictures made of glass. The gold decorations shined in the light of 1,000 candles. He had never seen anything so beautiful. "Look up there," George whispered to his siblings, pointing to the ceiling. Angels and saints were painted there, watching over everyone below. They reached their special seats near the front of the church. These seats were saved just for them. They were red with gold trim and very fancy. But they were also small, made just for children. "Sit tall and still," Kate reminded them as they sat down. "The ceremony will be long." Louis wiggled a little in his seat. Sitting still for a long time would be hard for him. William gave him a small book with pictures to look at if he got bored. Charlotte arranged her dress carefully so it would not wrinkle. George sat with his hands folded in his lap, just like his father. More people came into the church. The noise of talking grew louder. Then suddenly, trumpets began to play. The sound was so loud it made Louis jump. Everyone stood up. "It's starting," William said to his children. The big doors at the end of the church opened again. The person everyone was waiting for had arrived. The king was coming. The coronation was about to begin. The royal children stood straight and tall, ready for their important part in history. The king walked slowly down the long aisle. He wore a heavy red robe trimmed with white fur. On his head was a small crown that would soon be replaced by the big official one. Everyone in Westminster Abbey stood very still and quiet. Even little Louis stopped wiggling. "That will be you one day," William whispered to George, who watched with wide eyes. George nodded. He knew that someday he would walk down this same aisle to be crowned king. The ceremony began with songs sung by a choir of men and boys in white robes. Their voices filled the huge church. Charlotte loved the singing and moved her lips along with the words. She had learned some of the songs during her music lessons. Louis tried his best to be good, but sitting still was hard. He swung his feet back and forth under his chair. Kate gently placed her hand on his knee to remind him to stop. He looked up at her with a smile that made it hard for her to be stern. The bishop, an old man with white hair and gold robes, began to speak. He used big words that the children didn't understand. George listened carefully anyway. Charlotte watched all the grown-ups to copy how they acted. Louis looked at the pictures in his book, turning the pages as quietly as he could. "Now comes an important part," Kate whispered to her children. The king knelt down in front of the bishop. The old man poured holy oil on the king's head. The oil was kept in a special golden container shaped like an eagle. Louis thought this was strange and funny. He covered his mouth to stop from laughing out loud. Next came the crown. It was carried on a red pillow by an important man. The crown was huge and heavy, covered in jewels that sparkled in the light. Diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and emeralds decorated the gold frame. "That crown is over 300 years old," William told his children. "Many kings and queens have worn it." The bishop lifted the crown high for everyone to see. Then, very carefully, he placed it on the king's head. At that exact moment, all the lords and ladies in the church put on their own special crowns. It was like magic, seeing hundreds of crowns appear at once. "Will I wear a crown someday?" Charlotte asked her mother. "Maybe a tiara, like mine," Kate said with a smile. The church filled with cheers of "God save the King." The children joined in, their young voices mixing with the grown-ups. George said the words with a serious face. Charlotte said them perfectly, just as she had practiced. Louis shouted them with such joy that people nearby smiled at him. After the crown came the royal objects. The king was given a golden ball called an orb, a special stick called a scepter, and a ring for his finger. Each item had an important meaning. The orb shows he rules the world, the scepter shows his power, and the ring shows his marriage to the country. William explained to George, who nodded seriously. The ceremony went on and on. Louis began to get tired. He leaned against Kate's arm and tried not to yawn. Charlotte sat up straight, though her back was starting to hurt. George watched everything with great interest, knowing he would need to remember it all. Finally, the main part was over. The king, now officially crowned, stood up from his throne. He walked down from the platform to where his family waited. He stopped in front of William and the children. "Your Majesty," William said with a bow. George copied his father perfectly. Charlotte did a beautiful curtsy, her dress spreading out around her. Louis, trying his best, gave a wobbly bow that made the king smile. "Well done," the king said quietly to the children. "You're making the family very proud today." The children beamed with happiness. They had done their part well. But the day wasn't over yet. Next would come the parade through London streets, and then the balcony appearance that everyone was waiting for. The hardest part was still to come. They would have to stand in front of the whole world. After the main ceremony, it was time to leave Westminster Abbey. The king led the way, walking slowly down the aisle. His crown shined in the light from the tall windows. Behind him came the royal family. Prince William and Kate walked with their 3 children. "Stand tall and smile," Kate reminded them quietly. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sun was shining. The steps of the abbey were wet and slippery. William held George's hand, and Kate held Charlotte's and Louis's hands to keep them safe. A huge cheer went up from the crowd when they appeared. Thousands of people had waited hours to see them. The noise was so loud that Louis covered his ears. Charlotte looked a bit scared, but she remembered to smile and wave. George stood straight and waved like his father had taught him. "Look at all the people," Louis said, his eyes wide with wonder. "They're here to see the king," George told his little brother. "And us too." The royal guards, wearing red coats and tall black hats, stood in perfect lines. They held shiny swords and did not smile or move. Louis thought they looked like toy soldiers come to life. "Why don't they smile?" he asked his mother. "That's their job," Kate explained. "They have to look serious." The royal family got into fancy carriages for the parade back to Buckingham Palace. The king and queen rode in a golden carriage pulled by 8 white horses. William, Kate, and the children rode in the second carriage. It was dark blue with the royal coat of arms painted on the side. "This carriage is over 100 years old," William told the children as they climbed in. "Your great-great-grandmother rode in it." The inside of the carriage was lined with soft red velvet. The seats were much more comfortable than the hard chairs in the Abbey. Louis bounced up and down, testing the springs. Charlotte sat primly with her hands folded in her lap. George looked out the window, waving at people in the crowd. The parade began slowly. The horses pulled the carriages through the streets of London. Soldiers marched in front and behind. Music played from bands along the route. People cheered and waved flags as they passed. "Wave to the people," Kate reminded the children. "They've waited a long time to see you." The children waved until their arms got tired. Louis's waves were big and energetic. Charlotte's were gentle and proper. George's were steady and confident, just like his father's. The parade route was lined with flags and flowers. Big screens had been set up so people far back could see the royal family. When Louis saw himself on one of the screens, he made a funny face. The crowd laughed and cheered. "Louis," Kate said with a smile, "remember to be on your best behavior." The carriage rolled through famous London streets. They passed tall buildings and old monuments. The children saw places they had only heard about in their lessons. Big Ben, the tall clock tower. Trafalgar Square with its big fountains. The guards at Horse Guards Parade standing perfectly still on their black horses. "Look," Charlotte pointed to the sky. A group of airplanes flew overhead, leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke behind them. The planes flew in a perfect pattern to honor the king. The roar of their engines was so loud that everyone looked up. It was an amazing sight. Louis clapped his hands with excitement. As they got closer to Buckingham Palace, the crowds got even bigger. People were packed together, all trying to get a good view of the royal family. Many held up phones and cameras to take pictures. "We're almost there," William said as they turned onto the Mall, the wide road that led to the palace. The children could see Buckingham Palace ahead of them. Its gray stone walls and many windows looked golden in the afternoon sun. The royal flag flew from the roof, showing that the king was now officially crowned. Outside the palace gates, thousands more people waited. They had been there all day, hoping to see the royal family on the famous balcony. That would be the children's next big moment, standing before the whole world, high above the crowds. The carriage stopped in front of Buckingham Palace. Royal helpers in red coats opened the doors. William stepped out first, then helped Kate and the children. George jumped down by himself, trying to look grown up. Charlotte stepped down carefully, holding her dress so it wouldn't get dirty. Louis needed Kate's help but was eager to get out after the long ride. "We have 30 minutes before the balcony appearance," William told his family. "Time for a quick rest and a snack." Inside the palace, it was cool and quiet after the noisy streets. The children had been to Buckingham Palace many times, but today it felt different. More guards stood at attention. More helpers rushed around. Everything shined and sparkled for this special day. "This way, Your Royal Highnesses," said a helper named Mrs. Davis. She had worked for the royal family for many years and knew exactly what the children needed. She led them to a room where other royal children waited. Cousins and second cousins from all over Europe had come for the coronation. Some the royal children knew well, others they had never met before. George, Charlotte, Louis called their cousins. The room filled with happy voices as the children greeted each other. A table was set with small sandwiches, fruit, and cakes. Louis went straight for the chocolate cake. Charlotte chose a tiny sandwich with no crust. George took an apple and a glass of water, knowing he needed energy for the long day ahead. "Not too many sweets," Kate reminded them. "We still have the balcony to do." In a corner of the room, a woman waited with a sewing kit and extra clothes. She quickly checked the children's outfits. She fixed a loose button on George's jacket. She added a stitch to Charlotte's dress where the hem had come loose. She wiped a chocolate smudge from Louis's cheek. "Perfect," she said when she was done. You all look wonderful." While the children ate, William and Kate talked with other royal parents. They shared proud smiles about how well their children were doing. Even Louis, the youngest of all the royal children there, had behaved better than anyone expected. After their snack, the children were taken to wash their hands and fix their hair. Louis's hair stuck up in the back, and a helper used a wet comb to flatten it. Charlotte's ribbon needed to be readied. George's part was straightened. "Almost time," William said, looking at his watch. "Are you ready for the balcony?" The children nodded. They had been on the famous balcony before, but never on such an important day. Never with so many people watching from all over the world. "Remember," Kate said, kneeling to look them in the eyes. "Stand still, smile, and wave, just like we practiced at home." "And Louis," William added with a small smile. "No funny faces this time." Louis tried to look serious, but couldn't stop a giggle from escaping. Even George and Charlotte laughed. The laughter helped calm their nerves. A palace official in a black coat came to the door. 5 minutes until the balcony appearance, he announced. "Please follow me." The children straightened their clothes one last time. Charlotte helped Louis with his collar. George checked his reflection in a mirror and stood taller. The family walked through grand hallways with red carpets and gold decorations. Paintings of past kings and queens looked down from the walls. History was all around them. "In this painting," William said, pointing to a large picture, "is your great-great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, on her coronation day." The children stopped to look. In the painting, a young queen stood in her coronation robes, looking very serious. "She was only 18, Kate told them. "Much younger than you will be, George." They reached a set of tall glass doors that led to the balcony. Through the glass, they could see the huge crowd filling the space in front of the palace. Thousands of people waited, looking up at the balcony. Flags waved. Cameras flashed. The noise of the crowd was like the roar of the ocean. "The king and queen will go first," William explained. "Then we will join them." The children stood in a line, waiting for their big moment. Hearts beating fast, they prepared to step out and face the world. The glass doors opened. The king and queen stepped out onto the balcony first. The roar from the crowd grew louder. Prince William took Kate's hand, and with the children behind them, they walked out into the bright sunshine. The balcony was not very big, but it stood high above the crowds. From here, the royal family could see thousands of people filling the streets. Red, white, and blue flags waved everywhere. Some people had camped out all night to get a good spot. "Wow," George whispered as he looked at the huge crowd. He had never seen so many people in one place. The king and queen stood in the middle of the balcony. William, Kate, and the children stood to their right. Other royal family members filled in around them. Everyone wore their best clothes and biggest smiles. The crowd cheered and chanted, "God save the king." The noise was so loud that Charlotte could feel it in her chest. Louis's eyes were wide with wonder. He had never imagined so many people would come to see them. "Wave to everyone," Kate reminded the children quietly. George began to wave, his hand moving side to side just as he had practiced. Charlotte copied her brother, her small hand making perfect little waves. Louis waved with both hands high above his head, full of excitement. The king stepped forward and waved to the people. The crowd cheered even louder. The newly crowned king looked happy, but also a bit tired after the long ceremony. The heavy crown still sat on his head, glittering in the sunshine. Across the sky, more airplanes flew in perfect lines. They left trails of colored smoke behind them, red, white, and blue. The children looked up in wonder. Louis pointed and clapped his hands. The planes made shapes in the sky and ended with a big heart. "For the king," William explained to the children. "It's a special honor." Photographers on nearby rooftops took hundreds of pictures. News cameras pointed at the royal family from every angle. The children knew their faces would be on television screens all around the world. Charlotte stood very still and straight. just like she had been taught. She smiled her perfect princess smile. But after a few minutes, her cheeks began to hurt from smiling so much. George noticed his sister's struggle and whispered, "Just look at different people in the crowd. It helps." Charlotte tried his advice. She looked at a little girl about her age who sat on her father's shoulders. The girl waved a small flag and smiled at Charlotte. This made it easier for Charlotte to keep smiling. Louis, meanwhile, was having the time of his life. He waved to everyone. He pointed at interesting things he saw. When the king looked his way, Louis gave him a big thumbs up that made everyone laugh. The crowd began to sing the national anthem. The sound of thousands of voices rose up to the balcony. Some of the royal family sang along quietly. George knew all the words and sang proudly. Charlotte hummed the parts she knew. Louis tried to sing but got most of the words wrong, which made William smile. After the song ended, the king raised his hand in a final wave. This meant the balcony appearance was almost over. The family would wave for one more minute, then go back inside. "You're doing wonderfully," Kate told her children. "Just a little longer now." George stood tall, knowing he was part of history. Charlotte's perfect posture never dropped, even though she was getting tired. Louis managed to stay mostly still, though he couldn't help bouncing a little on his toes. As the family prepared to go back inside, Louis suddenly had an idea. He had seen people blow kisses on TV. Without warning, he put his hand to his lips and blew a big kiss to the crowd. The people loved it. A huge cheer went up. Cameras flashed even more. The sweet moment would be on the front page of newspapers the next day. "Good job, Louis," William said with a smile. Even the king turned and gave Louis a wink. The royal family gave one final wave, then turned to go back inside. The balcony appearance was over, but the day wasn't finished yet. Next would come the official photographs, a special moment that would preserve this historic day forever. Back inside the palace, the family was led to a grand room for the official photographs. The room had gold walls and a high ceiling with painted angels. Huge windows let in the afternoon light. Red chairs were set up in front of a blue background with the royal coat of arms. "Now we must sit very still again," Kate told the children. "These pictures will be in history books forever." The royal photographer, a kind man named Mr. Jenkins, had taken pictures of the family many times before. He knew how to make the children smile and look their best. His assistants set up big lights and cameras on tripods. "Your Royal Highnesses," Mr. Jenkins said with a bow, "if you could please take your places." The king and queen sat in the middle on two throne-like chairs. William and Kate stood behind them. The children were arranged in front, George on the left, Charlotte in the middle, and Louis on the right. "Perfect," Mr. Jenkins said. "Now, everyone look this way and smile." The camera clicked and flashed. Louis blinked at the bright light. Charlotte sat with her hands folded in her lap, back straight as an arrow. George stood tall with his shoulders back. "Louis, try to keep your eyes open this time," William said gently. "And Charlotte, you can smile a little bigger," Kate added. Mr. Jenkins took many pictures, some with just the king and queen, some with the whole family, some with just William, Kate, and their children. For one special picture, the king took off his crown and let George try it on. The crown was much too big and slipped down over George's eyes, making everyone laugh. This picture would not be shown to the public, but would be kept as a private family memory. "Now, just the children, please," Mr. Jenkins called. William and Kate stepped aside. The three children stood together in a line. Then Mr. Jenkins had them change to a new pose. George sat in a small chair. Charlotte stood beside him. Louis sat on a cushion at their feet. "Charlotte, put your hand on George's shoulder," Mr. Jenkins suggested. "Louis, look up at your brother and sister." The children did as they were told. The camera clicked again and again. "Wonderful," Mr. Jenkins said. "Now one fun one. Show me your happiest faces." For this last picture, the children didn't have to be perfect or royal. They could just be kids. George gave a big, natural smile. Charlotte's eyes sparkled as she grinned. Louis made a silly face that would make people all over the world smile when they saw it. After the pictures were done, the children were allowed to relax a bit. Helpers brought in juice and cookies. The king and queen spoke with William and Kate, while the children sat on a window seat watching the crowd still gathered outside. "They're still there," Charlotte said with wonder, looking at all the people. "They want to celebrate this big day," George explained to his siblings. "It's not every day we get a new king." Louis munched on a cookie, getting crumbs on his special outfit. A helper quickly brushed them away. The long day was starting to make the children tired. Charlotte tried to hide a yawn behind her hand. Louis leaned against her shoulder, his eyes looking heavy. "Just a little longer," Kate told them, seeing their tiredness. "You've been so good today." A palace official came into the room. "The cars are ready, Your Royal Highnesses," he announced. "Whenever you wish to leave." William looked at his watch. "I think it's time to go home," he said, glancing at his tired children. "They've had a very long day." The king and queen came over to say goodbye. The king knelt down to be at eye level with the children. "Thank you for being part of my special day," he said to them. "You made it even more wonderful." The children beamed with pride. They had done their duty well. They had been part of history. Now they could go home to their own palace, change out of their fancy clothes, and just be ordinary children again. At least until the next royal event. The royal family left Buckingham Palace through a side door. This way, they could avoid most of the crowds and cameras. Their car waited in a private courtyard. The black car had dark windows so people outside couldn't see in. "Time to go home," William said as they got into the car. The children climbed in, happy to sit down after standing for so long. Louis got in first, then Charlotte, then George. Kate sat facing them. William sat next to the driver. "Can we take off our shoes?" Louis asked, already trying to kick his off. Kate smiled. "Yes, you can get comfortable now." All three children quickly took off their fancy shoes. Charlotte carefully placed hers side by side on the floor. George put his under the seat. Louis left his in the middle of the car floor. As the car drove through London, the streets were still filled with people celebrating. Music played from big speakers. People danced and waved flags. It was like one giant party all over the city. "Everyone is so happy," Charlotte said, looking out the window. "A coronation is a time for celebration," William explained. "People will remember this day for their whole lives." Louis had already fallen asleep, his head resting against Charlotte's shoulder. His mouth was slightly open, and he made tiny snoring sounds. Kate took a small blanket from under the seat and laid it over him. "Poor Louis," she said. "It was a long day for someone so young." George watched the city pass by through the window. He thought about everything he had seen and learned today. Someday, it would be his turn to wear the crown. The thought made him feel both proud and a little scared. "You did very well today, George," William said, noticing his son's serious face. "I'm proud of you." George smiled at his father. "Thank you. I tried to remember everything you taught me." The car took a special route, avoiding the busiest streets. Police motorcycles drove in front and behind them to keep them safe. Even with this help, the trip took longer than usual because so many people were out celebrating. Charlotte started to feel hungry. The small sandwiches and cookies from earlier hadn't been enough. She tried not to complain, but her stomach made a loud rumbling noise. "Someone sounds hungry," Kate said with a smile. She reached into a bag and took out some apple slices and crackers. "This will help until we get home." Charlotte ate gratefully. George took some crackers too. Louis stayed asleep, missing the snack entirely. As they got closer to home, the children's palace came into view. Unlike Buckingham Palace, which was in the busy part of London, their home was more private. It had green gardens all around it and tall trees that kept it hidden from the road. "Almost there," William said. Mrs. Wilson has prepared a special dinner for you all. Mrs. Wilson was their cook, and she made the best food. The thought of her cooking made Charlotte and George smile with happiness. Finally, the car pulled up to their home. The driver opened the door, and William stepped out first. Then he helped Kate. George and Charlotte climbed out on their own. Louis was still fast asleep, so William carefully picked him up. The little prince didn't even wake up when his father carried him. His head rested on William's shoulder, his arms hanging down like a rag doll's. Inside, the palace was warm and smelled like home. Their dog, a black cocker spaniel named Oreo, ran to meet them, his tail wagging with excitement. He had stayed home during the coronation, looked after by one of the helpers. "Hello, Oreo," Charlotte said, kneeling down to pet him. The dog licked her face, making her giggle. A line of staff stood in the hallway to welcome them home. Mrs. Wilson, the cook, Mr. Thomas, who took care of the house, Miss Lee, who helped with the children, and several others who worked for the royal family. "Welcome home, Your Royal Highnesses," they said together. "And congratulations on a wonderful day." The children were too tired to be formal anymore. George and Charlotte just smiled and nodded. Louis slept on, missing everything. "Thank you all," Kate said to the staff. "Now, I think it's time for these royal children to become just ordinary children again." First came the bath time. The children were tired, but they needed to wash off the day before dinner. The helpers filled the tubs with warm water and bubbles that smelled like lemons. Louis had finally woken up, grumpy at first, but cheered up when he saw the bubbles. "Can I have my boat?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Kate nodded, and a helper brought his favorite toy boat. Soon Louis was making splash noises as the boat sailed through the bubbles. Charlotte washed in another bathroom, taking care with her hair. George, feeling more grown-up, took a quick shower instead of a bath. After they were clean, the children put on their comfortable clothes. No more stiff collars or tight shoes. No more heavy formal outfits. Just soft pants and shirts for the boys, and a simple dress for Charlotte. Their wet hair was combed neatly, though Louis still stuck up in the back, no matter how much it was combed. In the dining room, Mrs. Wilson had set out their favorite foods: chicken with crispy skin, mashed potatoes with gravy, peas and carrots arranged in a smiley face pattern, and for dessert, a special cake decorated with tiny crowns made of sugar. "This looks wonderful," William said as they sat down. The family sat around the table, much more relaxed than they had been all day. Louis couldn't sit still excited from his nap. Charlotte sat properly, but without the perfect posture she had kept all day. George leaned back in his chair, finally letting himself relax. "May I please have extra gravy?" George asked. "Of course," Kate said, passing the gravy boat. In public, the royal family was served by others. At home, they liked to pass the food themselves, like a normal family. As they ate, they talked about the day. Each child shared their favorite part. "I liked when the planes made colors in the sky," Louis said, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "I liked the music in the abbey," Charlotte said. "The choir boys sang so beautifully." "I liked when the king let me try on the crown," George said, even though it was too big. William and Kate shared proud smiles. Their children had done so well today. They had stood tall, behaved properly, and shown the world what the future of the royal family looked like. After dinner, the family went to the cozy room they called the den. It wasn't like the fancy rooms in Buckingham Palace. This room had comfortable sofas, a television, books, and the children's toys. It was where they spent most evenings together. "Let's see if we're on the news," William said, turning on the television. Sure enough, there they were. The news showed pictures of the royal family all through the day. There was George standing tall as they entered the abbey. There was Charlotte doing her perfect curtsy. There was Louis waving with both hands on the balcony. "Look at us," Louis shouted, pointing at the screen. "We're famous." The adults laughed. The children watched with wide eyes as the news talked about how well they had done. The reporters said nice things about their behavior and how cute they looked in their special outfits. "They're saying Louis stole the show," Kate said, smiling at her youngest. "What does that mean?" Louis asked, confused. "It means everyone loved watching you," William explained, "because you were so natural and happy." As the evening went on, the children grew more tired. Louis yawned so big that everyone could see his back teeth. Charlotte's eyes started to close while she was sitting up. Even George, who had tried to stay grown up all day, was fighting to keep his eyes open. "I think it's bedtime for some young royals," Kate said gently. The children didn't argue. It had been the longest day of their lives. As William and Kate tucked them into their beds, each child thought about the day in their own way. George thought about the responsibility of being a future king. Charlotte thought about how well she had done with her curtsy and waves. Louis thought about the funny face he had made that had everyone laughing. As the palace grew quiet and the children drifted off to sleep, the world outside was still celebrating. Newspapers were already printing their pictures for the morning editions. People all over the globe were talking about the royal children who had stolen everyone's hearts at the coronation. It had been a perfect day, and one that would be remembered in history books forever.